A London-based organization that monitors the conflict in Syria says ISIL has deployed mines in the ancient city of Palmyra. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says it is not clear whether the group is preparing to destroy the ruins. ISIL seized the city in May. They may have planted the mines to deter government forces. The UNESCO World Heritage Site contains some of the most extensive and best preserved ancient Roman ruins. ISIL has a history of destroying ancient monuments, which they consider symbols of paganism. Well, since the start of ISIL's advance into northern Syria, the border crossing at the Turkish town of Akcakale has been known as a hotbed of insurgent activity. CCTV's Natalie Carney has just returned. Natalie, what's been going on this border region?
Well, it's a rather sensitive topic here in Turkey, as you can imagine, and one that is spoken about sort of behind the scenes. But the small town of Akcakale has been rumored and has been reported to be to have jihadis, foreign fighters, living in some of the guest houses, waiting to cross over to the Syrian side. Even residents admit that they have seen ISIL. They know that there are members of the terrorist organization within the town. Last week, 18,000 Syrian refugees flooded into the town of Akcakale from Tel Abyad, which is just on the other side of the border, literally just a stone's throw away. In fact, it used to be one town that was just divided by a border. So now this town of Akcakale is even further stressed by this new onset of a refugee rush. So it's a very critical time for the Turkish government to take all this into account, of course, with the civil war continuing and the extremist groups multiplying due to the situation over there.
Isa Toktumur has been the muhtar, or mayor of Akcakale, twice. He's lived here all his life and knows its residents well, both new and old, good and bad.
They have been here for almost 1 year. We haven't seen any attack on Turkey or any misconduct against us.
By they, he means Islamic State militants. ISIL had controlled the Syrian side of the Akcakale border crossing since last June, until Kurdish-led forces recaptured it last week. ISIL had used the crossing to ferry supplies and people into Syria and onto ISIL-controlled areas. It's been alleged that injured ISIL fighters would get medical attention in Akcakale and that new recruits would be put up in guest houses in town until it was deemed safe for them to cross into Syria.
Some young people with psychological problems come here from Europe, from all over the world, and wait to cross the border. Of course, our security forces tried to prevent them, but they can't stop all of them.
This doesn't wash with another segment of the Turkish population angry with the Turkish government for not taking a firmer stance against the terrorist group. But Turkey has long had an open-door policy for displaced Syrians and argues that it's near impossible to control the 800-kilometer porous border it has with the war-ravaged country.
You can see why this Turkish town of Akcakale has its concerns. Right behind me here is the physical border between Turkey and Syria, and just beyond that barbed wire fence is the Syrian town of Tel Abyad, which has seen its fair share of the violence throughout the Syrian civil war. Most recently, it was besieged by ISIL militants, and during a rush of refugees towards the Turkish border, many of those militants were able to enter the country posing as refugees.
Last week, Turkish authorities detained 5 Islamic State members when 18,000 people rushed the border to escape fighting in Tel Abyad. Akcakale's population has doubled since the Syrian war began, but some locals don't see ISIL as a threat to them.
We haven't heard even a gunshot since ISIL arrived. They haven't been unfair to anyone. Before, when the Free Syrian Army was here, anything we put in front of our house would be stolen. But this hasn't happened with ISIL.
You get the sense that ISIL might be keeping a low profile in Akcakale, not to alert the authorities and jeopardize their presence in Turkey. It's still not clear if things will change for this small Turkish town now that Kurdish forces control the Syrian side of the border. But if ISIL prepares a revenge attack to recapture this important supply route, their fighters won't be too far away. Natalie Carney, CCTV in Akcakale on the Turkey-Syria border.
Natalie, tell us, what has been the reaction of the Turkish government to the changing situation on the border with Syria?
Well, the government does say it's doing all that it can. It's got a very complex situation to deal with, as was mentioned in that piece. It's very, very difficult to control an 800-kilometer porous border. There's some areas that are just vast land, other areas that are very mountainous. And not all these ISIL militants or malicious people, let's say, use the proper channels to get between the two countries. And sometimes the border is open, sometimes it's closed. It's a very difficult situation to control. The government, on the other side, there are a lot of people that are criticizing the government, as was mentioned, for not doing enough and turning a blind eye to the situation. But I think what's very important to mention here is that down in the Akcakale area, now that the YPG, the Kurdish forces, control the other side of the border, that's of a very great concern to Turkey. They're very concerned about these Kurdish victories by forces, Kurdish forces they deem the same as their own PKK Kurdish guerrilla group here that they've been fighting a civil war with for over the last 3 decades. So for Turkey, that's an even more important issue at the moment than any potential threat from ISIL.
Natalie Carney, thank you for your reporting there live in Istanbul. Another 700 migrants have been rescued off the coast of Italy. They arrived Sunday in the port of Crotone. Many needed emergency aid for malnutrition, dehydration, and injuries sustained on their trip. Some 100,000 have made the journey from Africa this year alone, according to the UN. The EU has begun plans to spread the migrants across its 28 members, but several countries object to the arrangement.